and welcome to Trusty Chords, the podcast which aims to celebrate music and those that create it. If you've only heard of one punk band, it's likely the Ramones. After all, they pretty much wrote the book on the leather-jacketed aesthetic and the musical delivery of short, sharp and punchy songs that influenced the genre's earliest years and is still heard to this day. Though all of the band's founding members have long since passed, their lineup wasn't static for their existence, and in 1989 they were joined by a young bass player named Christopher Joseph Ward. Of course, he was better known as CJ Ramone, which is exactly how I introduced him to listeners on today's podcast. CJ Ramone was a member of the iconic group for their final 7 years, and both during and after the band's run, he performed in a handful of other groups, including Los Gusanos, Bad Chopper, and the Ramainz, a Ramones tribute band which also included both Dee Dee Ramone, Marky Ramone, and Dee Dee's wife Barbara. As the real Ramones once said, "We're a happy family." In recent years, CJ Ramone has been a member of the greatest punk cover band out there, Me First and the Gimmes, working with Spike Slawson of Swingin' Utters on vocals, Lagwagon's Joey Cape on guitar, The Dam's Andrew Pinching on drums, and Rocket from the Crypt guitarist John the Swami Rays. It's a veritable who's who of the punk world. Last week, they released their latest album, Blow It, at Madison's Quinceañera, a live album in the same vein as 2004's Ruin Johnny's Bar Mitzvah, where they performed at an actual bar mitzvah. This time, you can hear them awkwardly celebrating Madison's 15th birthday. For this episode, the lovely CJ was kind enough to spend some time out of his day with me. Needless to say, he's something of a punk icon, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't an honor to chat to a member of one of the genre's most iconic names. Anyway, check out Me First and the Gimmes Blow It at Madison's Quinceañera, and once you're done, have a listen to our chat, and I'll see you at the end of the episode for some general housekeeping. CJ Ramone, thank you very much for joining this episode of Trusty Chords.
Good to be here.
Now, given the last name that you go by, I dare say a lot of folks listening to this could guess a little bit about your history. But for those unaware, could you give me a quick few words on who you are and why you're here today?
So, CJ Ramone from the world famous Ramones. Here, actually, I play bass for Me First and the Gimmes now, and we have a new album coming out in June 14th. I think it'll be out, but you can order it now. It's called Me First and the Gimmes Blow It at Madison's Quinceañera. It's a live record. So I'm here to talk about that and anything else you'd like to talk about.
Well, I should say, I listened to the record last night, actually, and how was the recording of that album? Because it like these live albums that, especially in a quinceañera, feels like it might have been not exactly the audience that you're used to performing for. So were there many fans in the audience?
So no, there were absolutely no fans in the audience. It's funny, the way it happened was we wanted to do a live record, and the Gimmes had done Me First and the Gimmes Ruin Johnny's Bar Mitzvah. So that was kind of like the template for the record, and we, because we hadn't done a record in 10 years, the Gimmes hadn't done a record in 10 years, we wanted to kind of do something that the original fans would appreciate, but something a little bit more, something less safe, I guess.
Yeah.
So we actually held a contest on the radio down in San Diego. Have Me First and Gimmes come and play in your quinceañera, and they had to submit an application and why and all that stuff. So this gal Madison, her family submitted it and they won it. And we played at her quinceañera, and it was a covered stage, but basically an outdoor stage. We got there early, got everything set up, got all the recording stuff set up, a little bit of a sound check. But the amount of rehearsing and preparing we did was pretty substantial, because we were not just recording it, but we were filming it live. So we had to be sure that we could, it was kind of like a one take thing. But that is, and you'll be able to hear it if you listen to the record. You can hear there are multiple, we call them clams, multiple mistakes that we just left in, because That's kind of the Gimme style. It's not supposed to be perfect and, oh, amazing. It's supposed to be fun. And, uh, but the actual recording of it, when we listened back to it, came out, it was really, really good. We were really happy with it. I felt like it was sonically at least as good as Ruin Johnny's Bar Mitzvah. So that was kind of like my yardstick for my decision on whether or not I like the record. But it was a lot of fun. There were no fans. There were no fans. Nobody there was a fan of the Gimmes. Um, but because they won the contest, they got their quinceanera paid for. So that was the
Everyone
attraction
wins. Yeah.
for the family.
Yeah.
And you can hear it in the recording. There was some really uncomfortable silences on a couple of the after a few of the songs, but that just adds to it. We love it. Our live shows, if you've ever been to one, you don't know. Sometimes there's parts of the show where you don't know whether to be insulted or if you should be pumping your fist or if you should be, enjoying yourself. So that the whole idea of the record and how it came off and the participants, it really worked out exactly how we were hoping it would.
And of course, you're talking about not having that many people applauding or anything. I assume that would have been far different to the old days, back in a group such as the Ramones, which I definitely should touch on before we get into this part. So I feel like I should ask the question. You were obviously quite young when you joined the Ramones. How did you find yourself in a band like that?
Um, I'll give it a short version of it. So I actually was home on leave from the Marine Corps. I was in the United States Marine Corps at the time, and a friend of mine who played drums for Joey's brother uh, called me up and said, "Hey, the Ramones are auditioning bass players at SIR Studio," and I was like, "Yeah, I'm in the Marine Corps." And then all of a sudden, I was like, "Hey, I can go meet the Ramones. Why the hell not?" So literally, I drove into the city, drove into Manhattan, and went to the studio, SIR Studio on 25th Street, over on the west side of Manhattan, and just walked in. Just walked in and was like, "Yeah, yeah, I'm here for the audition." Walked over to Johnny right away. John, big fan. Hey Mark, what's up? Joey came after we had played for a little while, and um, I left and went home and called up everybody, and I knew, hey, I just jammed with the Ramones. And then the next day, I was staying with my parents while I was home on leave. My mom was like, "Hey, Monty Melnick from the Ramones called, and he wants you to call him back." And my initial thought was, "I'd leave something at the studio." I thought I had left, maybe left my cord behind or a strap or something. Literally, that was my first thought. And Monty was like, "All right." I called him up. I said, "Yeah, it's Chris Ward." He goes, "All right, learn a couple more songs and come back." So I ended up going back and forth to these auditions over the course of several weeks, and I ended up being a deserter. I was on deserter status. So I got picked up by the local police. I got transferred to the Naval Brig in Philadelphia, and from there I went to Marine Corps base down in Quantico, Virginia. I was in custody there and sitting in the common area, and the corporal on duty came out and he was like, "Hey Ward, you got a phone call." And I was like, "Oh, it's my mother. She's going to be crying." So I pick up the phone here. "Chris, yeah, it's Johnny Ramone." I go, "Johnny, listen, I'm really sorry. I should have told you what was going on." He said, "Well, what's going on?" I said, "I'm in the Marine Corps. I still got 2 years left on my contract." And he was like, did they tell you anything?" I said, "Yeah, I'm gonna be out of here probably, a month to 2 months, and they're gonna give me a discharge." And he was like, "All right, do your time, and when you get out, you got a job." So I was like, nobody to celebrate with in jail, right? So I was there for, I think I was there for like 6 weeks, and then the Marine Corps put me on a Greyhound bus home and gave me $30, and day later, 2 days, 16 hours, I think it was, bus ride back up to Long Island from Quantico, Virginia. And I got home and I called Monty and he said, all right, take the weekend off. And we start rehearsing on Monday. And then I had 5 weeks to learn 42 songs, 45 songs, something like that. And then I did my first show September 30th, 1989 in Leicester, England.
And the rest, as
From the
they say, is history.
lowest point of my life, from being in jail to 5 weeks later at the highest point of my life, like literally, boom, just like that.
And then we go from the highest point in your life to now being on this podcast with an Australian journalist. So
But the thing about it is it's like that was like a lifetime ago. And post Ramones, I had almost 10 years of touring on my own as CJ Ramone. And in 2019, I retired from touring. I went out and did my last tour. In fact, I booked my last tour anywhere in the world in Australia.
I remember it.
That
Yeah.
was I told my booking agent, I said the last place I want to visit, I want to go to is Australia. That's where I want to finish my career at, because I always loved Australia. I always had a thing for Australia and Perth especially. So we finished up on the West Coast, and then me and my guys spent the next 3 or 4 days just laying on the beach and emptying bottles, and that was it. I came home, and the Gimmes contacted me right away and were like, hey, would you consider coming out and tour with us? And I was like, I don't want to go back to touring full time. If it's going to be a couple shows a year. And they were like, yeah, it's a couple shows a year. Of course,
That's how
I'm
they
back
get
to
you.
touring full time. However, the Gimmes tour in a tour bus. We stay in nice hotels. They pay me good. It's much different than where I was when I was doing my own thing, because I was still slugging it out in the trenches, like, touring in a van, driving the van myself, like, manager, everything, bean counter, the whole nine. I was doing it all. So the Gimmes has been a nice break.
That's amazing, and I'm really glad it worked out this way.
Yeah.
And I'd love to think of a great segue to get into the trusty chords part of the podcast here, but
Okay.
I should get, in the interest of time, should get into this part. So this section is built around the average chord. So folks who know theory know your standard chords are built around the first, third, and fifth notes of a scale. So we extrapolate that a bit. We talk about one artist, 3 albums, and 5 songs. Very wordy
Okay.
explanation, but it leads me into the first question, which is, CJ, who is one artist that has inspired you the most, whether it be personally or creatively?
So the first band that I ever like really got into, outside of like being influenced by what my parents were listening to, right? When I was younger, being around my mom and dad, there was a lot of country music, um, but like all different types of stuff. My parents listened to everything. But the first band I ever got into that really was like my own band was Black Sabbath. That's like the band that really hooked me. And the band and Geezer Butler would absolutely be the bass player that made me want to play bass. He's the guy that 100%. I heard the bass Hand of Doom. The first time I heard Hand of Doom, I was like, I want to do that. That's what
Yeah.
I want to do. I want to play the bass. So 3 albums by Sabbath. The first one, obviously,
That doesn't have to be Sabbath albums. It can be any albums that you'd prefer.
well, Sabbath is a big one because it's that album, the Black Sabbath album, is a big one because from the opening notes with the sound of the storm and the rains. So I grew up huge fan of horror films. Like I was really into like all the Hammer films and like super duper into all the old horror stuff and comic books and everything. And Black Sabbath was like this amalgamation of like all of the like I think it's the first band I listened to that triggered visuals. Like I hear the song and I could just picture some of the stuff from all the old creepy magazines and stuff that I used to read. Like it was such a great combination of all this other type of media that I really liked. Right. But that album, that Sabbath album, is a huge impact on the whole direction my life even went in, I have to say. So 2 more albums. The Ramones' first record. So this was another big one for me because um I I grew up in a pretty rural area, so I lived right on the edge of a huge bunch of acres of it's of a wooded area, just trees for acres and acres. And back in so I used to spend a lot of time back there when I was very young by myself, just exploring the woods. And there was an old Victorian mansion that had been an estate going way, way back that had burned down. And I used to explore this area and found everything from like coins from the 1800 to like really cool old pieces of like earthenware and stuff like that. I used to just dig through this place for hours and hours on end. Well, I was back there one day and I'm gonna say this is probably around 1977, 78, right? I was 12 or 13. Um, and I see these two gals hanging out smoking cigarettes. So I walk over and we start talking, and one gal's like the epitome of the 70s pinup girl. Long blonde hair, frosted glasses, tube top, bell bottoms, the whole nine, right? So we start talking and she's like, why don't you come over to my house? And I was like, yeah, okay. So we walk for like 40 minutes, I go over her house and we go downstairs into her room and I sit on the bed and she picks up a record and she puts it on. The needle hits the vinyl. She turns around and she says, "Did you ever hear the Ramones?" And it was the first Ramones album, you know. And I had never heard the Ramones before, but it came on, and I was like, "Wow!" So, she sits down on bed. She breaks out some weed. She starts cleaning her weed on the record cover, and she rolls up a joint. And we start. I never smoked weed before. I was still very young. She was an older, experienced gal. So we smoked weed and she kissed me, and I was like, all these firsts in one day. I hear the Ramones, I get kissed, and I smoke weed for the first time. So it's like that memory, that one day is so burned into my memory and it made that album even more special to me. In fact, after I was in the band for a while, I always tried not to be too much of a fanboy when I talked to Johnny. Um, but after I was in the band for a while, I told him that story. I said, that's how I found out about the Ramones. So that would be the second biggest influential record. After that, probably the Ramones were like my introduction to punk. So through them, I got into a bunch of other bands. But the other band I think that probably I was the most into, and again, for the same reasons I loved Black Sabbath, was Iron Maiden. First time I heard the first Iron Maiden record, I walked into a record store and saw that album cover, and I had to buy it. Like I had to buy it immediately. It was the imagery and everything, and I put it on. And again, Steve Harris's bass playing is just so unbelievable. He's so stands out up front. And then the songs, I was always into reading when I was a kid. I was into poetry. I just loved to read when I was a kid. Voracious reader, right? So I listened to songs like Phantom of the Opera and like this, all of this stuff connected to all these other things that I like, and that was a huge, huge moment for me because Black Sabbath kind of led me to Iron Maiden in that kind of same way, and then Iron Maiden led me to everything else after that. Then that's when I got into punk and metal kind of parallel to each other and just equally loved them both. But where I lived, there were no punk bands. There was maybe 3 or 4 other punks in the entire area where I lived. Like I said, I lived I really lived kind of out in the country. Those 3 records, I'd probably say are probably like the 3 big ones for me.
Of
And of
course.
course, later on, Metallica comes out and all of that stuff. But from when I was young, I'm talking about, 15 and younger. Those are the 3 albums that kind of.
Right. So I think we've only got a couple of minutes left, but if you did have 5 songs at all, I would love to know what 5 songs would be the ones that are the ones you can always turn to.
Right. So, like right now, if I pulled up one of my playlists, It'd probably be like a Tom Waits song. You're Innocent When You Dream. I love Tom Waits. Um, Johnny Cash, Ring of Fire. Um, what else? This sounds really out there and kind of really bizarre for me, but there's a song by a band called Looking Glass called Brandy. For some reason, when I was a kid, I fell in love with that song, and it's like on all the 70s, 70s gold albums. For some reason, that song has stayed with me. I think it's got more to do with the what it's actually about. I grew up on an island, so the ocean and all that stuff. Um, what else? What would be another big one for me? Uh, Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. That's another song that I really, really, really love since I was a kid. I saw Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, Black and Blue tour going back years ago. That's another big one that I love. And then there's a song called Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow? It's from that 60s era. The name of the band just jumped.
Yeah.
It's probably my favorite song of all time. I don't know why. It's one of those songs that just has stayed with me. So
No.
those 5 songs I know don't have much to do with the bands and the albums I listed, but like I'm picking songs off of the playlists I listen to the most that I've created.
And that is completely fair, because that's always the stuff you keep coming back to. Well,
Yeah.
I should say, CJ Ramone, I want to thank you so very much for being generous with your time and for being part of the Trusty Chords podcast.
Thanks, Tyler. Good talking with you.
Thank you for listening to Trusty Chords. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you're able to like, follow, share, and review this podcast on whatever your preferred platform of choice may be. I'm not going to add some snappy quip about how you're probably sick of hearing this, but I just did, so here we are. If you love being beholden to social media, and who doesn't, then you can add to your list of accounts to follow by finding me on Instagram and Facebook as Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word, and Twitter as Trusty Chords Pod. I also have a blog on my website where you can find a little capsule of each episode, along with a full list of artists, albums, and songs chosen by each guest. That's over at tylerjenke.com, that's TYLERJENKE/Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. You can also find a link to the Buy Me a Coffee platform where you can swing me a few dollars to support this podcast if you feel so inclined. As always, there's no obligation, but I'd appreciate it all the same. Lastly, I need to thank CJ Ramone for taking the time to appear on the podcast this week. I also need to express my gratitude to Neem of Diamond Creative for helping organize this chat as well. But once again, thank you kindly for listening, and I hope to see you all again next week as I continue to celebrate music and those that create it.